My friend Whitney's here. Hi, Whitney.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. We're going to let a few more people trickle in, and then we'll get started in a minute.
That must be your little one, huh?
Yes. He might pop in here. We'll see.
It's all right. Mine might too.
Yeah. This is the world we live in.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think we should get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more people trickle in. But thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Rachel Adams. I am the Chief Curator and Director of Programs at Bemis Center in Omaha, Nebraska. And we'd love to find out where you're joining us from. So if you want to put in the chat, where you're watching, we'd love to know where everyone is. We're super excited to welcome Dyani Whitehawk tonight to do a conversation with me and also all of you. Dyani is our Bemis Center 2020 Alumni Award winner. And we have a new alumni program here at Bemis. So it actually has a few facets. It has an alumni residency, which is actually open right now to apply to. So if you're an alumni, which means if you exhibited or did a residency with us, you can apply for the residency to sort of return to Bemis. And we also have these alumni convenings in different cities throughout the country. Unfortunately, obviously, we're not doing that at the moment, but we'll hopefully reconvene the convenings in the future. And then we also have this award. So it's a new program, and we're super excited to have Dyani as our second award winner. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank our other alumni award panelists, Lauren Haynes from the Crystal Bridges Museum, Diana Nawi, and who's independent curator in LA, and Sohrab Mohebi, who is the next curator of the Carnegie International in Pittsburgh. Right now at Bemis, our galleries are open to the public, and we are having 3 exhibitions, one by Paul Mapagi-Sequoia, one by Maria Antelman, and one by Joey Farso. And along with those, sorry, hold on, my kid is yelling a little. Along with those, we're doing a new program called Public Assembly, which will be led by Omaha-based facilitators Dewan Lamont Hayes and Nathaniel Rouleau. And this is taking place this Thursday. So if you want to join us for this conversation, it sort of uses the exhibitions as a jumping off point to offer Omaha an opportunity to share ideas and create community together. And this assembly focuses on notions of exposure, ranging from photographic context to questions of intimacy and disclosure. We're really excited to do this new program, so we hope you'll join us. And we'll have 2 subsequent programs after that, one in March and one in April. Oops, sorry. Move forward here, and then this is just a slide about our current exhibitions, and they are up until April 24th. So if you're around, please come by and see them. Bemis's vision is to inspire an open and diverse dialogue on the critical issues that give shape and meaning to the human condition. So with that in mind, I'm thrilled to welcome Dyani to the virtual stage. Dyani was an artist in the 2017 exhibition Monarchs, Brown and Native Contemporary Artists in the Path of the Butterfly that was curated by Risa Puleo, which traveled to... which traveled to several places throughout the country. So hopefully people here saw it. And it was a really wonderful exhibition, and you can find a link on our website. Jared can chat that in actually and show you. Dyani Whitehawk is Sichangu Lakota, and she earned an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She served as a gallery director and curator for the All My Relations Gallery in Minneapolis from 2011 to 2015. And support for her work has included the 2020 Carolyn Glasgow Bailey Foundation, the Minnesota Art Prize, the 2019 United States Artist Fellowship in Visual Art, the 2019 Idle Jorg Fellowship for Contemporary Art, 2019 Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship, the 2019 Forecast for Public Art Mid-Career Development Grant, and the 2018 Graves Grant Foundation for the Visual Arts. She has participated in residencies in Australia, Russia, and Germany, and her work is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, the Walker Art Center, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and the Denver Art Museum, amongst many others. She is represented by Bockley Gallery in Minneapolis and has a solo exhibition of her work upcoming at the Kemper Museum in Kansas City, which opens very soon. So welcome, Dyani. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So just so everybody knows, if you have questions, we're really, please chat them in as they come to you, and I'll try to incorporate them in to our conversation, but we can also leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So yeah, we're just going to kind of keep this open. We're going to show a bunch of work that Dyani's been making for the past 10 years, I should say. And we'll show some newer work that'll be in the Kemper Museum show, I believe, right at the end.
Yeah.
So get excited about that. So yeah, Dyani, if you want to just maybe like introduce yourself a little bit, and I'll kind of do the slides here.
Sounds good. Good evening or good afternoon or good day, wherever you're at. It looks like we've got people that are in attendance all the way from South Dakota to Scotland, which is really cool.
Nice.
That was fun to watch the locations come in. I saw some friends of mine here. So hello to you all. Thanks for tuning in. My name, as Rachel already told you, I'm Dyani Whitehawk. I'm Sichangu Lakota, the citizen of the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Central South Dakota, and I'm based in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota. So I have a studio in Minneapolis and live in Shakopee. I'm a visual artist, and I work across multiple mediums, but I consider my studio practice to be very much grounded in painting and mixed media work. I combine the histories and mediums of abstraction in the legacy and the history of easel abstraction, and the legacy and histories of Lakota artistic traditions that are based in abstraction as well. So I combine acrylic and oil and canvas with beads and porcupine quill work and mediums that have played a long history within Lakota art forms. So this picture is just a picture of me on graduation day when I got my BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it's included here because it's important for folks to understand who don't know much about me or much about my practice, that some background information in the fact that a lot of my inspiration and what I bring to my studio work and my studio practice and the works that end up on gallery walls and museum walls are influenced by and rooted in practices that don't end up in gallery and museum spaces, but are used for cultural practice and self and familial use. So everything that is in the case on the right, what I made as an undergraduate in my traditional arts classes. I went to a tribal college, went to 2 tribal colleges. And so within those institutions that are taught from an Indigenous perspective, we centralize and focus on art history from an Indigenous perspective and U.S. history from an Indigenous perspective. And So in my BFA exhibition, the reason I share this slide in talks is for folks to understand that my BFA exhibition included large-scale abstract paintings alongside cases of work that was exampled my beadwork, porcupine quill work, and parfleche practices. And at a tribal college, there's no questioning why that's relevant and why those things coexist. It just was and just is. And so we focused a lot of time on, as I said, learning our artistic history, the artistic history of this land base. And my focus, because my tribe is within the Northern Plains, has always been the history of Northern Plains artwork. So these are just some examples from the collection from the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, so that you can have some references from the symbolism and imagery and practices that I pull from and incorporate into my practice today.
We already had a comment saying that someone would love to hear about the Native symbolism in your work. So I think this is a really great introduction to that, to sort of be able to see some of the historical objects that then are influencing what you're doing.
Yeah, the historical objects, and the continuity, I think, is important to express. That those practices aren't historic practice. I mean, they're historic practices, but they're practices that are active today within our communities. Right. And I share these kind of contextual photos from my life experiences to explain to folks that it's not just about looking. It's not just about looking at collections or looking at history or looking at what was. These are active practices within my life that inspire my studio practice.
Right. I think the continuity is a really important word in that, because I think that, it sort of showcases that, this is the activeness of this type of work is continual, whether it, might look somewhat different because it's in a more contemporary context or not, it's still sort of an ongoing practice always.
Right. And I'll stop you, or not stop you, but challenge that idea more contemporary. One thing that, I think for Indigenous artists and Native artists and Native art in general, the American public tends to think about us in a historical format, and our art as something that's historic, and we get categorized a lot. And one thing that's important to remember is that the art that has been made by Native people historically and the art that is made by Native people today is contemporary in whatever context it's being made, because it's being made at that time.
Right.
And because we have this, strong lineage rooted to our artistic histories that carries out into contemporary expression that is related to a current time and place, people see those links, and oftentimes we're put into categorizations, traditional and historic, but that work is always contemporary. So I just wanted to extend that thought, but
I think that that's really sort of a good reminder, because I think, as a contemporary curator, right, like I am always working with living artists, and so it's sort of like all of, at one point everybody that was, the person that made this was living, and this was, the time that they were making it. So I think that that's always good to remember, because people are always like, well, I don't really understand contemporary art. I've heard that before, right? And it's like, well, it's just art that's being made right now.
Yep. So this is a two-hide dress that's in the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, and it's one of the oldest. Well, it's the oldest dress that they have in their collections. It might be one of the oldest dresses that is in collections in general. And so the lanes on the center of that dress are done in porcupine quill work. It's important for me to express to folks, because not everybody who comes to talks knows what porcupine quill work is. So I like to give examples to ground people in that understanding. Porcupine quill work is an Indigenous art form that, we have creation stories that talk about how this art form was gifted to our to my tribe. I can't speak to other tribes, but it's basically the art form that predates beads. So the beads that are on this dress are some of the earliest beads that started coming onto this continent for trade. And so they're bigger than the beads that you see a lot of folks use today. And this combination on this dress is like this perfect merger in time where quill work was, still being done on a larger scale like this, and then combined with these trade items with the beads and the tin cones. But porcupine quill work is done by tribes essentially everywhere where porcupines roamed, in a lot of different styles and techniques and designs and patterning. But it is a quintessential Lakota art form that's still practiced today, but it's really, truly an indigenous art form. And so go ahead.
I was just going to ask, when in your life did you learn this type of art form? Like, when did you start working this way?
I didn't learn quill work until I was attending the Institute of American Indian Arts. So I think it was in 2006 when I started learning quill work. I started learning beadwork as a young teenager, but I didn't have the opportunity to learn quill work until I was in college and had a professor there that knew how to do quill work that was able to teach me. So quill work, the porcupine quills are pulled from a porcupine, softened, dyed, or sorted, washed, softened, dyed, and then manipulated in a variety of ways to adorn a variety of items. And so this slide is just an example of, the continuity of those practices. So that older dress and this dress, the green dress, is with NMAI as well. And I don't know the year on this, but this is an older dress as well. And so, but you can see with the once smaller beads became available, more colors became available, the way that just, that is so typical of Native art, is every time new materials become available, they're brought into our already established artistic practices and people run with it. And that history and that rooting is still there and visible, but it flourishes into pieces that reflect, now. And so the women on the right, those are women's Northern traditional buckskin dancers from a powwow, not so long ago. So you can see that continuity as well.
We had a question about, do you prefer to include your work alongside some of these other items to highlight that they're always done simultaneously? Or have you done that in the past?
I haven't. And I don't really have the desire to do that. I mean, I think that, when people get to, go to talks and listen to talks, and, that's when we get to really learn the background information of where artists are coming from. But the works that I make, when I make a dress or make a pair of moccasins or hair ties or whatnot, they're for use. They're not to, I'd have to make myself a backup set. I wouldn't have anything to dance in. That's not the purpose for those. The purpose for those is for something else. Mm-hmm. So they're not for public consumption, I guess. Those are right. Another part of my practice, just as important, but different mm-hmm. context. Mm-hmm. So this picture of women's fancy shell dancers, it's just a kind of example that what I was speaking to before, with the incorporation of the most contemporary materials that are available and how that evolution continues. And you can see how the symbolism and the designs and the practices of beadwork and sewing and all of that is still there and still grounded, but it's just always moving and always reflecting, current time and resources. And mm-hmm. So this is a Lakota possible bag. That's porcupine quill work on the front. And this is, again, just to kind of ground you visually in the motifs that were common and are common to Lakota artwork, so that you can kind of understand the upcoming slides.
There was one question about the symbols that were on the green dress and the mm-hmm. colors, and if you have any insight into what those are symbolizing, or, I know that that's not your work, so I just want to ask the
Yeah,
question to the audience.
I thank you for the question, but I'm not going to get into pretending that I can speak to the symbolism for somebody else's creation who I never got to speak to. So there are like teachings and worldviews and perspectives that are embedded in Lakota symbolism and in symbolism for tribes that we can look at and be like, okay, this person is thinking about this worldview, or thinking about this is horse tracks, this is a teepee, this is, there are specifics, but those things are combined often to tell very personal stories, or familial stories, or stories that are specific to your band or your tribe. And if it's historic works, I've not been able to talk to that artist, so I can't say this is about her husband, this is about her, this is about her child, this is, I don't know that, and I don't want to pretend to be able to read them in that way. And that's a desire for a lot of people, to want to be able to look at those symbols and break them down and know. And I think it's really important for us to accept the fact that it's okay that we don't, and that and to honor that, and to see and feel the beauty of those works without having the desire, which is a fairly Western desire, to be able to decode and read it and know exactly what it's saying.
Yeah. And I think, that goes really into like the, thinking about abstraction, right, in general, and, not decoding it, just experiencing it for what it is, seeing, having your own reflection of like what you're experiencing and taking that away as a personal reflection, and yeah, maybe you read into it yourself, but of course, if you're not there with the artist to have the conversation, then you can only go so far. And I think it's really that experience of looking at the work, experiencing the work, and thinking about it and how it makes you feel.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're in your work now.
Okay. Yeah. So this piece is titled Tioshpai. It was done in 2010, and Tioshpai translates to extended family. Your Tiwahe is more your inner circle, your immediate family. Tioshpai is your extended family. And this piece is the first piece that I started to incorporate quill work onto the canvas. So I was making paintings that were referencing and drawing influence from beadwork and quill work and Lakota art forms. And I was, practicing beadwork and quill work. And then I went to grad school, and I was accepted into, mainstream university in the painting department. And I showed up and thought I pretty much just had to paint. And so that's what I was doing. But then I started really missing this part of my practice, which is so integral to who I am. And I had to figure out how to combine those practices in a way that made sense, not only for me, for my values, and that we're grounded in my own teachings as a Lakota woman, but also that were relevant to studio practice and to an MFA program. And so I started experimenting in a variety of ways, and this piece was kind of the first successful piece, I felt like, that came out of that exploration. And so the lines, those long lines that are in the piece that go across the top, and then the teepee doors, that's all done in that quill work. So there's about 77 inches of quill work stitched onto a 60 by 90 inch triptych. And this piece took me months to make. It was challenging, and it didn't fit the grad school calendar. So I had to figure out a way to continue to bring forth the content and the conversation that's embedded in those practices, but do it faster. So I had to figure out how to kind of merge those value systems from a Western perspective and an Indigenous perspective. And so this piece, Continuity, is the first time that I replicated that quill work in paint. So it was my effort to bring forth everything that's embedded in that practice, but faster.
Yeah.
And so the lanes that are on the left represent that quill work that you see, that motif that I referenced earlier on the possible bag. And as it travels across the canvas, it, travels through this plane, and on the right side, it starts to swirl and twirl, and it can be seen as either becoming unraveled or disheveled, or freer and dancing. And it's supposed to be all of those things. And it's an and it's an abstraction of the reality of cultural continuity, and how it can be rooted and yet look different as it travels through time, but still, made of those same threads. And the idea of, really kind of reinforcing the fact that culture isn't stagnant and it can't be stagnant.
Yeah, and that I think there's always sort of like two sides to the coin, right? There's always the sort of thing that feels really like continuous and good, and then there's that interruption that kind of comes in, and like it can be good, it can be bad, it can be sort of all
Yeah.
these different things, and sort of this
Yep.
is that's what I kind of see when I look at this piece, and this
Yeah.
piece too a little bit as well. So
Yeah, I mean, colonization is a beast. It's done a lot to harm our communities and disrupt our art forms and disrupt native ways of life and well-being. And the cool thing about Indigenous people is that there's many cool things, but our communities are wildly artistic. You can, visit any Native community, or be, within the Native community in urban areas, and we are full of artists. There are so many creators within our communities, and so the resiliency within our art forms has been so consistent despite, the forces of colonization and a lot of the negativity that has happened, to our communities and within our communities. So that is what, this symbolism is basically supposed to speak to, is both those things that you mentioned, kind of both sides, the part that's difficult, but also the beauty and the ability to be resilient.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, sorry, I was just going to say this piece has glass beads in it, which is a little bit different than the previous one. So
yes, this one's beaded on canvas.
Adds like a dimensionality to it in a different way too, that I think is really wonderful. So I just wanted
to
put that in there. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
It's always hard with Zoom. You're like,
yeah. Yeah, it's really challenging. So these are just two examples of small 8x8, 9x9 pieces that incorporate porcupine quill work, beadwork. These ones are done on linen. They also incorporate acrylic paint and gold leaf. So they're just, examples of the various ways that I will sometimes bring all the mediums together. And sometimes it's done strictly in paint, and it comes out of a variety of different ways.
In terms of these too, I mean, for me, like I'm seeing, obviously, the Indigenous influence, but also, especially this one, on the right, there's kind of like even like a little bit of like an op art kind of influence, in the way the black and white is sort of moving back and forth for me. So I really love that. You're sort of, to me, like there's this, like kind of bridge that's being created. And, there's something that I know that you've talked about, is that Native Indigenous artwork might get relegated to like a different gallery, right? It's not necessarily, people, especially like in the past, I think even more have done that, right? And this is where I'm like, I don't really understand that aspect of it, right? Because I feel like this is work that is speaking to everything that is being made, today. And so I think like the idea of like visibility and being able to, showcase that influence comes from all different places, and it's really important to be able to speak to all of those things simultaneously. And so
yeah, it comes from all different places. And I mean, I'm definitely influenced by the trajectory of abstraction and easel painting and art movements in the way that they're taught within mainstream academia. I mean, I've moved through that process, and I'm a participant. But I think it's also really important to recognize that a lot of those artists were influenced by Indigenous art, and that's simply not highlighted in the way that we teach art today.
Right.
So I think about, I look at, for me, the design and the patterning in here is pulled from design and symbolism within Lakota art forms.
Mm-hmm.
And I've played with it, and yes, it reminds me of op art, and it also reminds me of Dazzler Navajo weavings, and things that were happening simultaneously to a lot of those art movements that just don't get the same kind of recognition within mainstream art history.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of, where I'm like in that blind spot, right? Because I wasn't, taught that. And that sort of unfortunate thing of like now being like, okay, how do we reconcile with the fact that there is, so much that came before us. Okay.
It's okay.
And I'm going to be right back. I'm so sorry.
Maybe go to the next slide and then
Yes, sounds good.
I'll talk while you. So this piece touches on what I was talking about before. This piece is titled Resilient Beauty. It's an oil painting that, hi. It's an oil painting that, references both quill work and the style of beadwork that has been the most prominent in Lakota beadwork, which is a lane stitch style beadwork. And so I started painting in a manner that references both of those practices. And so on the left-hand side, these lanes are coming down and they're painted in a way to look like they're peeling up off the canvas. And on the right-hand side is a painted pattern of cotton calico fabric, which has been a coveted trade item within Native art since it became, within Native communities, I should say, since it became available. And so much so that it's like an ingrained part of Native aesthetics for a lot of tribes, where certain calicos are coveted and they have this old school quality and they make you think of certain relatives or certain people or dresses or ribbon shirts or whatnot. So both the flowers and the lanes are painted in a manner that look like they're peeling up off the canvas. So that's about that refusal to be stagnant, that refusal to stand still, and the beauty of the resilience of Indigenous art.
I love that. And it does feel sort of like there's some sort of like floating kind of happening, right? And it's sort of like lifting you up. I feel like it's sort of pulling you up. So I love thinking about that.
Thank you.
These are some more research images that you're providing. And then
just pay attention to the form.
Yeah. Think about the form and then think about in looking at this painting, connections, which formally, obviously, what I really love is like seeing this negative space above it, which is something that, in your later work that will show like you're sort of taking up the whole canvas and even in the other ones. But in here we have this sort of like negative space, and it's really sort of like highlighting for me, like these forms kind of like, again, rising sort of up for me. There's kind of like this movement that I see. Yeah, I'm just like interested to see what you want to say about this exactly.
This piece is a mixed media piece, so it's acrylic and beadwork on canvas. Everything is painted with the exception of the symbolism that's in the moccasins. So the dragonfly symbols on the right and the four directions crosses on the left are beaded directly onto the canvas. And this piece is about connections. So I started utilizing this moccasin top form in grad school in about 2010, and it became a way for me to, depending on how I adorn these forms, sometimes they're very abstracted and become fairly ambiguous, and other times they become more direct. But the idea is that they are a stand-in figure. So they can either be super indirect or they can be super specific, but they're free of the specificity in regards to gender, age, and all of the things that when you actually use, the human form, you are restricted to, or you get defined by certain characteristics. And so this piece speaks to the connections between people. So there's a relationship happening between the red and the blue. It also speaks to the connections that, for me, the opening of what would be the area that you would put your foot in inside of the moccasin. They're painted to kind of look like illusionistic doorways that you can enter. And that speaks to the connections that we have with ourselves, with our identities as Indigenous people, with our connection to the land, to our relatives, to history, and to our communities today. When we put our moccasins on, there's a different kind of connectivity to those things than when you're walking in your street shoes.
That's really beautiful to hear. And, I think there's something that, again, like, is really kind of opening up, like that, like you said, that opening is really kind of, I don't know, there's something pulling me very into this painting in a way that, I don't know, feels really strong. Sorry.
I'm going to quickly answer Carol's question.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, to some extent, I do see them as a form of portraiture. I use those forms as stand-in figures. So I want them to have agency, presence, emotion, and I want them to bring to the painting qualities of humanity without being the human figure.
I'm going to just scooch a little bit farther so we can kind of see some of the newer work. But if people have comments or questions, please feel free to chat them in. And I wanted to stop here and talk about this work. It's acrylic and bugle beads and thread on canvas. And this one for me, in really, like, the color is really important to me. So I was hoping you could maybe talk about the black and gold specifically. And then again, like this sort of like arched doorway and sort of what you're thinking with this, because that sort of reminiscent kind of continues in the work and some of the work that I just went through quickly. So.
Yeah. So the arch form is really of the further abstraction and the collapsing of the two references that I was just talking about in the last painting. So, this moccasin top as this stand-in figure and those doorways that make you feel like you can enter the piece. This form ended up serving both those functions for me. So it became, an extended way to continue to, create a central figure and simultaneously a place that feels like you can enter into this space. I really like playing with shallow illusion. I rarely paint realistic, depth in the way that high realism allows you to do, but I really like to create works that have shallow illusionistic properties that make it feel like you can get inside. And so these forms tend to do that for me. And putting the beadwork on top of these backgrounds of stripe painting backgrounds that speak to the history of abstract painting, specifically the era of color field and stripe painting, which has a lot of influence. A lot of those artists, you can find ties to when they were looking at or collecting or lived near Native people. And so I see a lot of our work in the work of the abstract expressionists that are kind of, lifted up in art history. And that's the lens that I see it through. But the artists, the master artists that are within the Native community don't get that same kind of recognition. So for me, beading on top of those backgrounds is to provide an opportunity for artists or for audience members to recognize those histories as happening simultaneously. And it also gives me a moment to kind of strike a balance by forcing folks to see the beadwork a beat before they see the painting. So, and then the color for this one, I mean, that was aesthetic choices. I do think, when I look back on it now, I didn't think about it then, but I think about the Ad Reinhardt black on black paintings, and I mean, those are all things that I was studying and thinking about in the past. So I'm sure they creep up from time to time. But I wanted to utilize these two different forms of beads. So they're all black and gold beads, but one is straight and the other is twisted. And so they reflect the light differently. And I wanted to create a monochromatic piece that was simply affected by how the light hits it.
Yeah, I think you very successfully did that. And I really like that idea of sort of that shallow illusion and, also kind of this like reference to like, yeah, feeling like you can go in it, but also feeling like you're being stopped by it. And like, so this one, and I'll be right back.
No sweat. I often create pieces that are partner pieces. So a lot of times one painting will have at least one partner. Sometimes they'll be in a small series of two, and got one series that's up to 7 right now. But I often create these kind of counterpart pieces, and by doing that, for me, balance and reciprocity are really important concepts within Lakota worldviews and teachings. And so I often have this desire to create kind of counterparts to pieces. And so this piece is the follow-up to the black and gold piece that we just saw. And this one is untitled, but all the colors. So literally working with all the color 30 millimeter bugle beads I could source. And it's also done on a acrylic painting background, referencing the stripe era of painting and color field era. Let's see here. What else could I go? I don't know if I can't advance the slides. Does anybody have a question? Can you speak about your work as a curator? How does it relate to your art making? Sure, we'll hop on that till our host gets back. I worked as a curator for the All My Relations Gallery for just shy of 4 years, right out of grad school. So the All My Relations Gallery is a contemporary Native art gallery in Minneapolis that was founded by and is owned and operated by Native people and focuses on celebrating Native arts. I had no intention of curating whatsoever, never crossed my mind, never thought about it once. And then a few folks, learned that I'd be moving to Minneapolis after grad school. And randomly, I got a call. I got 1 week after grad school. I was visiting friends in Atlanta, and I got a phone call and asked if I would come down to the All My Relations Gallery to have an interview. So I hung up the phone and was like, I think I might have just got a job that I wasn't looking for. And I almost didn't take it when I was proposed the job because I didn't study curation. I got my MFA, but they needed somebody who was familiar with contemporary art and familiar with historic Native art, and somebody who had connections within our community, within the art field. And so I took on the challenge, and I ended up really falling in love with it. And I got to learn under the mentorship of another Native curator, Joe Horse Capture, who worked at NMAI he worked at Minneapolis Institute of Art for 14 plus years, and then NMAI. And his father was a Native curator as well. So he's probably one of the only second generation Native curators out there. And so I under 4 years and then left that job.
Dyani?
Work here and there when I'm invited to do so. Yes.
Oh, sorry. It froze for a second, but I think we're back.
Oh, okay. All right. Great.
And I'm sorry about that.
We had a question about That's okay. We had a question about curations. I just hopped on that until you got back.
Great. No, perfect. Thank you.
So
I zoomed ahead to this Untitled Quiet Strength one because I sort of wanted to hopefully maybe we can touch on the title of this work and sort of what it's speaking to a little bit in terms of what you're sort of thinking about. And I think there's a detail here, so I'm going to go to that too so people can see it.
Yeah. So this painting, you saw in other paintings, that the gesture, this movement, this motif of when I'm painting to mimic the art forms of porcupine quillwork and lane stitch beadwork, it has been like a supporting character in paintings for years, since 2010. And this painting in 2016 was the first time I decided it doesn't need to be a supporting character, it can be the conversation. And so I wanted to create this work to honor the legacy of Indigenous artists and specifically of Native women artists and their contributions to the history of art on this land base, as well as their contributions to the history of abstraction. They are undervalued, underrepresented, and their contributions are significant and real. So the vast majority of work, of Native artwork that's in collections today is work done by women. So a lot of those abstract artists, the white male dudes that are that are highlighted and supported, duly so, but they were looking at the work of women when they were pulling influence from Native art. And that's important to realize and recognize and talk about. And so this piece is about that, the generations of Lakota women and Indigenous women at large that have done, have contributed amazing legacies of quillwork and beadwork and basketry and weaving and ceramics and all these amazing art forms that are, the foundation of the artistic history on this land. So these pieces, Untitled Quiet Strength, celebrate female contributions to art and to abstraction. That first one also pays tribute to Agnes Martin at the same time, as one of those artists that, a female artist who has had a significant contribution to abstraction. So the stripes on the sides are reference her color palette, but also reference beadwork palettes that are common within Northern Plains artwork. And it's painted over a background of gold. So this quiet strength references, so they're meant to pull, and you can kind of scroll through, I think these, there's like 7 of these, so we can scroll through them while we talk about it. But the title, Untitled Quiet Strength, the Quiet Strength series, is speaks to the strength of women as unique from the strength of men. So in the same way, art forms and materials have been put into hierarchies, art by this kind of person, art done in this material is at the top, art by anything else is somewhere down the line, not as important, not in the main gallery, not under art history with the capital A, it's a different class, it's a different whatever. The same way that we've created those hierarchies within art, we applied those same kind of hierarchies to materials and people and characteristics of people. So when we think, we've been taught the idea that strength, the ultimate form of strength is this male prowess, or that the ultimate form of intelligence is academic intelligence. There are many forms of intelligence. There are many forms of strength. And the female, the female relatives in my life have demonstrated to me phenomenal strength. And it's unique to women. And it is unwavering and resilient and fierce, and sometimes not as big and bold and boisterous as male strength, but it cannot be broken. So one way that I like to explain this to folks is that most of you will be able to think about at least one woman in your life or in your family where if somebody is acting out of hand or getting out of line, all she needs to do is shoot them that look and you will not challenge her. It doesn't matter how much bigger you are than her. It doesn't matter how much stronger you may be, how old she may be. You will not mess with her because you know that strength and you know what it means and what it represents. And that's something that's unique to those feminine forces. And so that's what this title speaks to. And then as it goes through the series, it starts to add on this she gives quiet strength. And that is meant to extend the recognition beyond our feminine and female relatives to also recognize our common mother, the land, and all that she gives us and all that she provides for us to be able to live.
We had a couple of questions. One from Angie that she wanted to know a little bit more about the two-part titles, the Untitled and then the Quiet Strength one, and so on. Is the first to tout a Western culture and the second to a Native culture? Is that what you're thinking when you title it Untitled and then parentheses Quiet Strength?
No, it's just that it is they are individually untitled, as in I'm not remaking the narrative over and over again each time I make one of these paintings, but they're all a part of the Quiet Strength series. Okay. So the body of work is this Quiet Strength series. And that's why when we get to these ones that start to incorporate copper, it's extended to she gives quiet strength, because at that moment I started thinking about how I wanted to be able to speak about not only all that our female and feminine relatives provide for us, but also the land as our common mother. It's a good question, though.
It is a good question. Thank you, Angie. And then Annika and Johnson and Sarah Rowe had a question. Do you see these marks as being contained within the four sides of the canvas or as expanding beyond this canvas?
I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, they're contained by the canvas because it's the surface I'm working on. But and of course I'm thinking about the composition within the plane that I'm working on. But, if I had the capability and when I have, the time and the ability, I've made them bigger and bigger and bigger, because I do think the conversation is definitely beyond the edges of the canvas. So yeah, I'll leave the interpretation of that up for the individual viewer, and how they feel about it. But I'm definitely not thinking it's, that the conversation ends here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment about the scale, because especially this one is fairly large, and thinking about, scaling up. Is that something that,
Yeah, so this is the last one. This is 7 feet by 10 feet. And these are, individual brush strokes, oftentimes 2 to 3 strokes to get, to make sure that they're dense enough. It took me 6 months to make this piece. And the last 3 months I was working double time, unhealthy hours, 70 plus hours a week to get it done on time. So painting in this format at that scale isn't practical and isn't necessarily healthy if I'm trying to get it done in a certain timeline. But it's really important for me because there's been such a gap and such a lack of representation of Native art within the mainstream art field, and a lack of recognition of the contributions of Native people to our artistic history, that it's really important for me to centralize these pieces in those spaces, to have them on the walls in conversation with their peers, in like that, the historically the references are, I feel like for me, my intention is to bring forward my relatives that have sustained these art forms so that I can continue to talk about and work in these art forms today. This isn't my individual genius. This is me responding to generations of phenomenal artists that have continued to nurture these art forms, just like easel painting has been nurtured by generations of artists, right? We didn't, those of us that are painting today, we weren't individual geniuses that were like, ooh, canvas makes the perfect, foundation. And when I mix oil and pigment, it's, it, we're practicing legacies that have been supported by others. And so, but the legacies of Native women and Native artists have not been recognized and valued at the same level as their non-Native peers. And so size and scale for me is important. I want them on the wall. I want them seen. I want it talked about. I want it recognized, and I want it to be recognized as having equal value as the non-Native counterparts.
I think it's really, it does talk about the importance, I mean, obviously we when people think about abstract painting, a lot of times they are thinking about these big paintings. And so you're right there, right? You're putting that right out there. Like I can make big paintings, everyone. But I love
one stroke at a time.
Yeah, one stroke at a time. And so like thinking about, just the labor of this painting in particular and how long it took you, and those tiny, individual strokes that are sort of paying homage to all of the Native women that have come before you, I think is like such a powerful symbol in and of itself. I mean, obviously like looking at this, and I haven't seen it in person. Is this in the Kemper show, by the way?
Yes.
So when I see it in person, I'll be, be able to like, there's something about the scale, right, that really like envelops you. I can feel it even just from the slide. And so it's really exciting to be able to know that, to think about that labor that you've put into this and all of the labor that's come before you and that will come after you. And sort of that can, again, speaking to that continuity, I think. I don't know. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I know we're kind of getting,
We're pushing
around
time,
8 o'clock.
yeah.
So I don't want to, keep people so much, but obviously I'm going to go through these prints a little bit. And then I'd love to speak to these pieces and then show the listen piece so that people
Okay.
can see that. So
Cool.
do we want to talk about the carry pieces?
Yeah, and I'll try to be succinct.
And if there's any more questions, please continue to chat
feel
them
free. This carry series, there's 3 works in this series so far, and they are functional objects. So this is actually a bag, like an oversized purse. And this series is really bringing a lot of the language and the modes of making from functional objects and, the artistic practices that you saw earlier. So basically it's like a tobacco bag or a dance bag sized up and created specifically for the gallery as opposed to being danced with or utilized. And the rationality for them is that I wanted to create a context to talk about the various ways and the various categorizations that have been applied to Black, brown, and female and non-binary artists to place their art in a different, to other their art. And one of those ways has been this idea of function. If it's functional, it's something else. It can't possibly be highly conceptual work if it's made to have a functional purpose. It's design, it's craft, it's something else, right? I don't think that line of thought is actually thinking deeply enough. And I think it's really problematic. So I know that even our functional works are embedded with generations of conversation and knowledge. They're embedded with ideas around cosmology, around a worldview, around tribal history, personal history. So much is embedded into those works and the function was a part of that as well. And so to look at those works and to categorize them simply as craft just isn't, it's not truth. And it has been a way to, again, create those hierarchies that place some art up here and other art over here. And so I wanted to push back against that and create these functional objects, and to point out the fact that, in my opinion, all art serves a function, even if your function is simply to create a conversation and to, push back against the previous beliefs in the previous generation, and to move that conversation forward. That's its function. And so all art has a function and is functional. It's just, dependent on how you're thinking about the definition of function, and how you're thinking about what defines art, and how you're categorizing those things. So it's, for me, it's a challenge for folks to think a little deeper about the way that we've categorized art in the past, and what we want to carry with us forward. So the title Carry is about that. What are you intentionally carrying? What are you putting into these works and then into gallery and museum spaces? What conversations do you want to carry with you? What's valuable? What is guided by your values? And how do you want that to shape the world going forward? So these next two pieces are beaded over copper buckets and with copper ladles. And the same reason that I used copper paint in some of those earlier paintings, copper, again, hierarchical structures, we have monetary value placed on artistic mediums, and resources from the land, and people in all reality. And resources from the land, gold has this higher monetary value, right? And then all the other metals come below that. And copper is like at the bottom of the list, but copper has medicinal qualities that gold doesn't have. And it doesn't mean one is higher than the other. They have different functions, but they're all gifts from the land, right? And so it's again a challenge to think about, how are we assigning value, and how does that translate to how we interact with the land and with one another. So you can go forward to the next one.
Yeah, we just had third one. Sorry.
I was just going to say, the super long fringe is, again, kind of serves the same purpose as the really large painting. They're meant to, you have to respect these pieces when you walk into this space. You have to see it, and you have to walk around it, which means you have to give it its due place in that space. And in the way that not only Native art, but art by Black folks and brown folks and women have not been given in artistic history. And we're still fighting for that today. We're making progress, but it's slow, right? So this, long fringe is meant to, you have to respect it and walk around it and see it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about the walking around. This is sort of the first works where we're seeing of yours that are more sculptural, that, they do have this different kind of presence. There's sort of a reference even to the body in terms of the lengthening of this work. So yeah, I think that that is definitely really important to be not only confronted with this, a big painting, but also with this object, with this sculpture that, is kind of staring right back at you, right? It's sort of trying to, carry you forward, I think, is a really good way, sort of like bring from the past and move into the future. We had a question, are there specific artists that you'd like your work to be in context with?
Oh my gosh.
I'm sure that's a pretty big question.
I see your name, Kristen. That's no pressure. Geez, yeah, there's I think a long list, but I would need a little bit more time. That's something I'd want to take, careful time and thought to think about. There's a lot of artists I want to have my work in conversation with. A lot of people that are making really phenomenal work today. And then, I always appreciate the opportunity and look for the opportunity to upset the way that we've been teaching art history. So, I want BIPOC artists and, you know, underrepresented artists in conversation with those canonical artists that have been taught. And I want folks to start to reevaluate and rethink how we're telling those conversations going forward. So, you know, I would like my work paired with the, you know, canonical artists of the past, but I'm super excited about being able to show alongside my peers that are pushing and challenging the art world towards equity, towards representation of our communities, real representation of the diversity and beauty of our communities. So anybody who's doing that, I'm down to play with.
I think that's really important to say, though, is that, you know, there really needs to be this rewriting, you know, of so many of those, you know, those books that I studied in undergrad, and but, you know, also, you know, it is going to come from more things like this, right? Having more conversations. You know, I feel like if there's one thing, you know, of the many like terrible things that COVID has brought, it has brought this awareness, and people are able to join in a little bit more and learn more, you know, this way, right? Like normally we might have done this in our gallery and only people in our community could have come. Whereas now we're being able to open it up to so many more people. So I do think that there's that accessibility part of things is really great. Of course, there's a lot of negative things that have happened, and I acknowledge that, and obviously a lot of hurt. But trying to sort of put a little bit of a silver lining into things, you know, slightly in order to, increase that equity, I think, within this world and, you know, the art world, but in general. And I think that's also like a really good segue into this piece, Listen, and thinking of, if you want to maybe do a quick intro to it, and then we can show the trailer for it.
Okay, so the trailer is just a really short trailer to give a small sampling of what this installation is. So you get an installation picture here behind the Carry 2 piece of these 4 monitors, and the installation is an 8 monitor installation, so 8 channel video installation, and in each video is footage of a Native woman speaking her native language on the land base that that language comes from, so on her indigenous homelands. And each video runs for approximately 5 to 6 minutes, and she speaks in her language for that moment of time, and it's layered. The imagery of her is visually layered with B-roll footage from the land, and then the sound is layered, her speaking and the sound of the land base as well. The piece is titled Listen, and it creates a moment of opportunity for epiphany. So as American adults, most of us can walk down the street and likely identify upwards of 10 to 20 languages just by sound. You know, if you went down the list and thought about how many languages, if you just heard it, even if you couldn't interpret anything, oh, that's Spanish, that's German, that's French, that's whatever language, insert, you know, so
Mandarin.
the list. And when I went down the list for myself, it was long. It's a long list. Depending on where you live, you even you get familiarized with the newest group of immigrants to that space as well. So Hmong is really, and Somali are really prevalent languages in the Twin Cities, and you become familiarized with all of that. You know, we can all, you can differentiate easily between Chinese and Japanese, and, you know, even if you don't know a single word, you know what it sounds like. But the average American would be hard pressed to identify 1, 2, and beyond 2 of the languages that are actually from this land base. Think about that. like the impact of colonization and the reality that most people that live here, many have never heard or have only been introduced to maybe a couple indigenous languages. They could hear and know what language that is. That's a sad fact. There are over 560 federally recognized tribes today, and there were a lot more before that. And so that reality is profound. And so this installation is not meant to, you don't get interpretation panels that tell you what the speakers are speaking about. It's simply an opportunity for folks to get introduced to a small handful of the languages from this land base as they are tied to an individual woman today, and then tied to the geography that language comes from.
Okay, I'm going to play this trailer for everybody. You can hear it, right?
Eshkwag kibwab ma neo migiziwag Bemis ma meswema gibia going gibia si
ya kutsan kutsquer kem kutsan kutsquer katamom matakanave mvavak nyats kutskonyedik nyavi anyevaik nyavi kmank
Yudki Bakui Nenta Naku Pimenta Itama Kinta Luling Iwa Bonta Kin Wazokina Inikaragi Hahemanunga Hingaire Unchi Kakara Jima Onanka. He anchara ha hemaninka hingaire. He only had a chalk shopping there.
Makam
Kikara
Juliaman, Bashilan, there was Quipum Loyasla, Opim Ryokansaman, Pokuyukum Kramashoda, Yada Shitman Short, Kupania Sonnet.
Darn kneel down on what he going. Dale ho, dili so, ni wat gwenos, ni wagaya heo, dale ho.
Don't touch up hina. Yushki at Inaku, Yushki, Chichek hena, you happy day. Hena, you watching bo, Doksta, a kewa chiakik day. You might talk you as.
I'm just going to go back to this slide. So I wanted to ask you about this installation a little bit. When it's on view, I'm assuming that you're hearing all of the languages as once as you're sort of walking through the space. Is that sort of how it's been installed here?
So I want to quickly note that I don't know how it was on your guys' end, but on my end, there was a ton of lag time and it was super choppy. In real life, it doesn't look like that. I hope it came through.
It was clear on my end, so I didn't know.
Was it? Okay. I hope it came through clearer for other people, but it looked like I don't know. It's the videography is really beautiful and the sound is done really beautifully. And so there'll be this trailer will be available on my website actually within the next few days. So if it was choppy for you guys, visit my website. It's just my name, DyaniWhitehawk.com, and hopefully be able to see a clear picture of it. But I know it so well that I saw it and I was like, oh, it looks terrible. The installation, when you experience in place, there's directional speakers, and it's kind of in the early stages of development. So in the Plains Museum, in the install that you see here, we used the monitors as the speakers, and so there was this beautiful interplay between all of the languages and sound when you're in the middle of the space. But it didn't accomplish as clearly as I'm looking for the ability to really be introduced to the sounds and cadences of the languages. And so for the Kemper installation, we have directional speakers so that you can really clearly hear and have that real introduction and start to familiarize yourself with one language at a time, but travel through the space. And there will most likely be some, amalgamation of the sounds within,
Right.
which I invite and I love, but I really want folks to be able to clearly hear each one.
Right. I think the, going back to the idea of, visibility but I love that this is called Listen. I love that it has this, this like introductory way of just being like, I want you to be in front of this screen, listen to the sound that you're hearing, take it in, hopefully maybe even watch it more than once. Obviously it's always hard, people like go through spaces quickly, but I've watched this trailer a few times and I'm really excited to see the Kemper show to sort of be able to like hear the individual voices a little bit more for a little bit longer. So because there's differences, even in the trailer, you obviously hear it very clearly. And I think again, the fact that we're all living probably not far from, a lot of indigenous people and tribes, and the fact that we wouldn't be able to possibly recognize the language that's spoken or that has been spoken here or in everybody's individual place. So I'm really excited about this, and I know that you're aiming to even make it a bigger piece in the future too.
I want to continue to grow this piece. So I also want to note that this is work, I'm not a videographer. This is work that I've done in collaboration with filmmaker Rizal Benali, who is also Lakota and Dene. And she's been a fabulous partner in this. So it was really an exciting opportunity to be able to create a vision, but in collaboration with a friend of mine who has a different skill set. And the idea is to continue to add to this. And eventually I want to have a really large installation, and I would like to have 20 to 24 monitors, which is still a very small sampling of the languages from this land base, but it's at least, the idea is that it grows and so that it becomes a stronger representation of the large diversity of people and languages, and really immerses people in this experience to understand that not only have most folks not been introduced to the languages and can't, identify them, and the reasons why they can't, but for most folks, I think it's fairly safe to say that most people have probably never even thought about it and why that is, so it creates a moment of pause and an opportunity for reflection for people to really start to begin to understand the chasm of knowledge that people have not been taught, and the ways that the history of this country, it's violent and intentional erasure of Native peoples. And but at the same time, it's a gesture of introduction and hopefully of repositioning people's minds to be thinking about that. If we're given the opportunity to learn and to think more deeply, we have the ability to think more critically going forward, and we have a stronger tools set to be thinking about why there may be a lack of representation or a lack of inclusion in all fields, not just the arts.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, again, it's something to, we obviously can only like move forward every day as we're, we can take what happened in the past and sort of be able to recontextualize, represent, and like actually represent like what the history of this country is, the history of the people that were here, and the history that we want to go forward. So
Exactly.
I think that a piece like this really, really speaks to that. And it's exciting for me to, obviously having gone through all of these slides and looked at your painting practice, and then you're sort of moving into with the carry pieces, these sculptural pieces, and then now you're moving into video, and the piece after this, which I think unfortunately we should probably end because we could keep going. But you're also diversifying your practice, as an artist, and so I think that that's also like something really important to point out, that the diversity that you're starting to like bring to your own personal practice is really, I think, exciting. So
thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And the cool thing about it is, it's really given me the opportunity to collaborate and to work with other people, and to the next piece, we won't get into it, but it's a photo installation. And I was able to work with my friend who's also a photographer, Tom Jones, and I love being able to collaborate with folks and highlight their skill sets and talk about what we can make together. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share my work, and thank you for all the kind comments on the feed. I'm seeing them all, and I appreciate them all, and thanks everybody for coming.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining us, and this was really, really wonderful to speak with you, Dyani, and we're super excited about your show at the Kemper. So if people can get to Kansas City, it's going to be opening, I believe, the 18th of February. So very, very soon.
And we'll have more online programming.
Right. So yeah, if you want more, there'll be plenty of programming going forward. So again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And I appreciate your patience with my single parenting tonight and my 4-year-old. So, this is our life now. So
yeah, no, if I may just quickly, thank you, Rachel, so much for the invitation. I want to thank the Bemis Center and for all the panelists that selected my work for the Alumni Award that created the reason why we're here tonight. I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and the support of my work. And then the last thing I want to say is that I have a 7-year-old, and I think that one thing that is really important to learn out of all of this is that our kids are just as important part of our life as any work meeting that we have. So I will never be upset by any child interruption that is ever out there. It's real, it's life, and it's important. So
exactly. I completely agree.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, again, thanks everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yeah. Good
Stay
night.
safe and warm. Bye.
Bye.